We'll be starting in just a minute. I'd like to introduce all of you to this evening, Third Act Faith. We're very excited that everyone has joined us this evening. We have a wonderful program ahead of us. We will be listening to Pat and Reverend Fletcher Harper in just a minute. Also, we want to let you know about how we're going to proceed after that. If there are questions for the Reverend, please put them in the chat and we'll be following that. After that, we're going to learn a lot about what's been going on since the last time we were all gathered together. And finally, we will have a presentation from a national staff person, Anna Goldstein, who will share with us 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, that day of action coming up. And at that time, you will have a chance to put your heads together and come up with some really great ideas about what we should do as Third Act Faith on that day in March, when we take to the streets and make our presence known in the rest of the country. And with that, I'd love to introduce you to Jane Ellen Nickel, who will share with us a moment of reflection. Jane Ellen.
Welcome, everyone. I'm coming to you from Northwest Pennsylvania, and so glad that we can all be together virtually. This is a poem by W.S. Merwin called To the New Year. Some of you may have seen it in the Forum on Religion and Ecology newsletter, which is where I saw it. So listen to these words of gathering. With what stillness at last you appear in the valley, your first sunlight reaching down to touch the tips of a few high leaves that do not stir, as though they had not noticed and did not know you at all. Then the voice of a dove calls from far away in itself to the hush of the morning. So this is the sound of you here and now, whether or not anyone hears it. This is where we have come with our age, our knowledge, such as it is, and our hopes, such as they are, invisible before us, untouched and still possible. So may it be.
I'm delighted now to introduce Pat Almonrode, co-coordinator of this group, and he will introduce our speaker.
Well, hello, everybody. Very happy to be here. Very happy to see all of you tonight. I have tonight the great pleasure of talking to my friend Fletcher Harper. Fletcher is the executive director of GreenFaith, and probably needs not much more introduction. Let's just get right to a little conversation. So Fletcher, I want to go back to actually 2013. I'm in New York City, and I was a part and still am a part of 350 NYC. And it had been decided in 2013 at some level way up above my head that the People's Climate March was going to take place in New York City. So being a member of 350 NYC, I was part of some early organizational meetings with these big coalitions of folks trying to figure out how to do this, how to actually do the People's Climate March. And at some point, our director, facilitator, whatever he called himself, said, we need somebody to help organize the faith contingent to this march. And we all sort of looked around at each other, and I did one of these things, you know, like, well, I guess I could do that. And that was the start of what became, I think, probably one of the high points of my life, working with you and helping organize the faith contingent. So I know the process of getting that started looked different from your end. How did you get involved in the People's Climate March?
It's great to see you, Pat, and good to see lots of familiar faces. It's a bit embarrassing, but I don't actually remember. All I remember was was you and I starting to meet every 15 or 20 minutes or so. And it was really, it was just really good distributed organizing work. I mean, we got a lot of fantastic people from different denominations, different religions, each organizing within their own community. There was a huge amount of pent up energy. 3-4 years previously, the climate talks had totally cratered in Copenhagen, and the climate movement had gone into a sort of 2-year-long depressed state because it just was a shattering of the hopes and expectations that there was a rational pathway through this thing. And then the divestment movement sort of kickstarted us all, and the climate march opportunity came along there. So it was a combination of pent up energy, and it was really, I think, the first time at really large scale that religious communities were able to come together in what I think all of us on this call know is just an absolutely vital part of how we're eventually going to get the change that we need, which is sort of public direct action on climate. So, I remember seeing lots of you all that day and in the weeks and months leading up to it. It was a really good piece of work, and we need to, we've obviously still got a ways to go.
I learned so much working with you on that and working with everybody that was involved. But I have to say, and I think I'm probably not alone in this, even though that was definitely a high point of my life, it seems, quite frankly, it seems not to have had a whole lot of effect. I mean, it did raise the issue in the public consciousness. And I think, from our particular perspective, it sort of raised the issue in the faith community. But it's hard to point now at a particular result that came from that. And I think it seems to me like there's a slightly different feeling now that we're sort of looking for concrete and targeted kind of projects. And I think that's true of GreenFaith. GreenFaith has been involved in working on climate financing, or the financing of climate chaos, and working to fight that for quite some time. How did you decide that was going to be one of the targets of GreenFaith, and what's been your experience with that?
Well, I think, the first thing I'd say is I think actually, I think the People's Climate March gets a fair bit of credit, along with many others, but I think gets a fair bit of credit for the Paris Climate Agreement, because it demonstrated and signaled to political leaders that they had cover to move on this, and some strong grassroots pressure. The problem is that there is just an unbelievable amount of money and political corruption and influence, and just the inertia of a massive status quo that makes change really, really hard. And then, a literal sort of viral insanity around the world between Trump and Bolsonaro and, all of that garbage that we've had to sort of struggle with for much of the past sort of 6 to 8 years. So it's, we got into the finance stuff first. I mean, I think of the fossil fuel divestment work as the first wave of the climate finance work, where there was a recognition that money, along with politics, money and politics were the two pillars of the system that needed to get changed, and that divestment was a way to use a financial tool or lever to both try to start sending a signal symbolically and in real ways to the financial system that things needed to shift on the finance front, and also signaling to policymakers that if enough people were willing to move their money, that was a pretty sort of reliable indicator of political support for action as well. And then more recently, we've got, we're targeting BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and Fidelity, the biggest asset managers who are funding climate projects all over the world in terms of new fossil fuel, new coal and oil and gas expansion. I'm here in Germany. We've got our all-team retreat, and we're just about an hour from the Lützerath coal mine expansion that got a lot of coverage. And we had a number of team members in that action over the last several months, and some folks who got arrested. So I think that, now the significance of the finance stuff is that there is an enormous level of combination of indifference in the finance sector and sort of large scale greenwashing, with massive amounts of money still getting plowed into these projects, and they've just got to stop. And so there's just a need for a series of actions. I mean, we've been putting a particular focus on BlackRock the last year and a half or so, because they're one of the worst offenders. And we were really proud. We had about 30 people of faith and clergy arrested at an action in BlackRock last October. The April prior, we'd had about a dozen. The October prior to that, we'd worked with Jewish Youth Climate Network to on an action that was 3 rabbis and 6 young Jewish activists. So we're trying to get a drumbeat of direct action going on there. Equate is doing really good work, focusing particularly on Vanguard, but it's just a vital area. I mean, the finance sector traditionally has not been easy to move on these kinds of issues. So it's going to take a sort of concerted, consistent effort and a real threat to their brand identity, a real sort of reputational threat. And it's going to take a lot of uncomfortable social interactions with people in the industry to really, try to get this to change. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah. I was one of those 30 or so people arrested back in October at BlackRock. And it was really a beautiful action. And Chelsea here in New York, the GreenFaith organizer, gets a lot of credit for that. It was beautifully put together.
She's very good at making sure that these public actions. I mean, I think one of the things that's really important is that when we go into action publicly as religious people, we do so as religious people and not as a kind of pale imitation of secular activists. I think it's really, really vital that we make our identity clear in that way, in part because the issue in the US is so, unfortunately, but is so politically polarized that if we're clear about our religious identity, that gives us a shot at getting people to engage this issue in a pre-political kind of mindset, which is part of what's needed to shift the calculus in a lot of people's hearts and minds on this.
So, as you know, Third Act is organizing this day of action that Ace referred to at the beginning there, 32123, and that's. I don't want to say the culmination, but it's certainly a culmination, a big step in the Banking on Our Future campaign that Third Act is running. I know you've probably been talking with Bill about this, and what can you tell us about how Third Act and GreenFaith are going to be working together on this?
I know that our US team has been in conversation with some folks at Third Act, and I don't know the details of it, except that I know that we're planning to be supportive. And I think that, my hope is that we can find a way. There's more and more religiously based action on climate finance happening in a lot of places around the world. And I'm hoping and thinking that one of the things that's going to be important in the future for reasons of capacity and for reasons of maximizing impact is that we can find a way to do some good and effective coordination around this. We've got a team, an organizer in Charlotte, North Carolina, who's Amy Brooks, who's doing some really good work pressuring Bank of America on their not good record of fossil fuel financing. There are some folks who are starting to do some work in London on these issues. Our organizer in Germany is starting to do some work pushing Deutsche Bank on the fact that and so I think that this theme of religious groups engaging around climate finance is really important. And I think that we need to do, Dayenu in the US is doing some really nice work, starting to marshal the energies within the Jewish activist community on this. I think that it's going to be extremely important for those of us in the faith sector who are working on this to find a way to collaborate, find a way to start to target and pressure our institutions. I mean, I will say, and Archdeacon Betsy Bennett and Reverend Margaret Bullitt Jonas are on the call here. We were really proud 6 years ago to get the Episcopal Church in the US to make a divestment commitment, which was passed by an overwhelming vote at an Episcopal Church General Convention. But we've not been able to get a response from the Episcopal Church about whether they've actually implemented that resolution. So I think that we need to be putting pressure on the banks and the asset managers. We also need to be putting pressure on our own institutions to not only to make these commitments in name, but to follow through on them. It really has to happen. So I think that there's some good coordinating work that we could do. Maybe you and I could put our heads together again, Pat, and start to try to do that, because I think there's some really good, really important work to be done.
Well, you can always count on me. In fact, I'm sure you can always count on all of us here. Would love to continue to work with you and to continue to learn from you and get tips on just how to navigate all this stuff. Now, there are a lot of questions in the chat. So I think maybe we should turn to that. Jane Ellen, do you want to read out some questions here?
Sure. Fletcher, someone who does not know you as well as some folks on the call, has asked a little bit about your background, how you came to this work. And I know when I met you, GreenFaith was in New Jersey, and now it's an international organization. So can you talk a little bit about what GreenFaith is and how it has come to this work, and how you personally came to this work?
Sure. No, I'm an Episcopal priest. I came to this a little bit over 20 years ago, making a transition that was an early stage effort, just at that time targeted in the state of New Jersey, with the awful name of Partners for Environmental Quality, working on trying to engage religious communities on climate and environmental issues. It was incredibly hard to get traction, 20 plus years ago on these issues. It's hard for all of us to imagine, but it was truly incomprehensible to people about what the relationship was between religion, faith, and the environment. I mean, I see Paul Santmeyer, whose writing has been such a meaningful, sort of in-depth support to an awful lot of us for many, many years. But look, let's be real. There was next to nobody thinking about these issues back 20, even 15 years ago. I was able to, I got connected with that early stage group, Partners for Environmental Quality. One thing led to another. I was very fortunate to get some, both an invitation and also a real sort of sense of inspiration about making the shift. And it's just been an organic process of evolution. We started doing work in New Jersey, helping congregations green up the way they operate, but also right from the start, looking at the issues from a systemic lens in terms of, what's the impact of pollution on poor communities? Why is it that communities of color always get dumped on the worst? The work grew. Betsy Bennett, who I've mentioned already on the call, was in our first sort of class of GreenFaith fellows, and we started to do a national education and training program and sort of a sustainable sanctuaries type program, and got into the divestment movement, and then made connections, and again organically have grown, and about 6 years ago started working internationally. So we've got team members. I mean, here at the retreat we're having in Germany, we've got our team members from Indonesia and Japan and France and Germany and Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Brazil. So it's growing. It needs to grow faster. There's a lot more energy around the movement, and we focus more and more on, sort of sharp-edged climate justice campaigning with an emphasis on being as courageous as it is reasonably safe to be in a lot of different regions of the world. A lot of the countries I just mentioned, getting arrested is not a joke, and it's not an easy, it's not safe at all. But we've got a lot of courageous folks who are, the East Africa and France team are working on fighting the East Africa crude oil pipeline. Our US team is focused on the asset managers I mentioned earlier, and on trying to get President Biden to declare a climate emergency and looking at organizing around stopping new extractive projects in the Gulf South, in the Gulf Coast, and Indonesia and Japan working on trying to stop the expansion of coal financing and coal plant development in those countries. So it's, as you all know, there's no shortage of work to do. It's very, very interesting and cool to see sort of growing multi-faith engagement on this. I think that religious denominations still are way, way behind in terms of, and are not proving to be effective mobilizers and movement allies, often because of inertia, sometimes because of lack of resources. But I think that it's through groups like ours and IPL and Third Act and many others that we've got to get a lot more people involved.
Yeah. Maybe time for another couple questions, Jane Ellen?
Sure. Fletcher, lots of comments about your work and memories that you all shared about your work together that other folks were involved with. So hopefully you can take a look at the chat and see some of those. But a question, what are the areas that bring you hope? What makes you feel hopeful in doing this work?
I mean, it's always been the community, in the sense of, the chance to be with folks. I mean, I remember, talking, God knows how many years ago with Dan Terpstra as he was sort of leading up, sticking it to the Presbyterian Church on getting them to divest. And, whatever it was, Dan, a decade plus later, they finally got partially with the program, which, with, I'd see Jerry Cappell's name there. I mean, this. Look, I mean, a lot of us know each other, right? I mean, we've been in this fight for a while, and we're going to be in it for the rest of our lives. And so it's the community that that is what gives me hope, and seeing more and more people willing to do things that have required more and more courage. I think that in terms of the real world impacts, I think if one is serious about this, it's devastatingly not hopeful. I was talking with some of our East Africa team tonight, and we have a woman, Lynette Otieno, who does a lot of our communications work, and there's a horrible climate intensified drought going on in northern Kenya. And she showed me these photographs and short videos that she'd taken when she went there recently of people and livestock just literally lying on the ground dying because of the drought, and the anguish. And it's just, so I think, the other thing is that it's just infuriating, the level of complacency and smugness that still afflicts so many major global North governments and institutions. It's just absolutely unacceptable. So that's more anger than hope, but it's what keeps me going.
Yeah. Jane Ellen, one more.
Let me see. We had a couple here.
Ace raised her hand. Ace, do you have a question?
Well, I have one while you're looking.
Okay, she's been feeding them to me, so I'll pass it to Ace.
No, but I just wonder, you said something about religious obligation, and I wondered if you could spell that out a little bit more for all of us listening to you. We take some of these ideas, for granted, but what exactly do you mean? Where's the religious obligation to do this work? We are Third Act Faith, so let's learn from GreenFaith a little bit about that.
Each religious and spiritual community has its own compelling, in-depth, deep theological, moral language and frameworks to use around these issues. And you all should, if you haven't already, you should get Paul to do a sort of webinar, one of these things, just sort of touching on some of the biblical foundations and theological foundations work that he did, a couple of decades ago that still is really compelling. I mean, I think for me, what it comes back to is that so often this issue is turned into it's approached as if it is an issue of political polarization, when the reality is that this is an issue that is about preventing trauma and loss and people losing their livelihoods, their homes, their health, any sort of stability that they have in the world. And anywhere you go that you look at climate impacted areas, that what you see the impact and the trauma that climate change causes. So to me, it is a very fundamental issue about love, and about that you cannot pretend to be committed to a God of love or a faith tradition that is about love that is not active on this, because it is, tomorrow, I mean, today here in Germany, tomorrow for you all is Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's a different kind of devastation, but it is one of enormous magnitude. And we need to bring that same kind of sobriety and then resolve not to let this go further than it already has.
Well, thank you for those words, Fletcher, and thanks for spending some time with us tonight here. Early morning for you, is that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's 1:30 in the morning now.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, listen, get some rest. God bless all your work, and thank you again for spending some time with us. We will definitely be in touch.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to see so many longtime friends and familiar faces and mentors and colleagues and everything. So thanks to you all, and look forward to staying connected, and let's continue to go after this together.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you.
Take care all.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Pat. So
Sure.
here we are at this point in our meeting this evening. Really glad I asked him that last question. I have to say, I thought that was a beautiful answer. So
Yeah.
we're really eager to share what's been going on in Third Act Faith with all of you. It sounds like a lot of you know each other. I don't think I know any of you before I joined in about 3 months ago. So I'm delighted to be part of the gang here. But we're really eager to know what's happened. And I'm going to turn back to Pat to let us know a little bit about Third Act Faith in the last 4 or 5 months.
All right. Well, let me take this opportunity, first of all, to remind everybody to save the chat periodically. If you don't know how to do that, down in the lower right corner of your screen, where you would type a message into the chat, you'll see 3 little horizontal dots. If you click on that, you'll get a window where, what do they call those? Anyhow, a window that opens that one of the options is save chat. And that way you can keep, a copy, a pop-up menu. Exactly, Jeff. Thank you. You can keep a copy of the chat. We are also recording, so you'll have that available later. So Third Act, just to give the very briefest of sort of structural outlines, because it's not always obvious, but Third Act itself is the national sort of umbrella organization. We started out calling them Third Act National, but then we realized that the affinity groups like Third Act Faith have a national scope as well. So they said, well, all right, we'll be Third Act Central. So that's how we're supposed to refer to them now. Third Act Central is a core of staff people with Bill McKibben who direct all of this stuff and facilitate all of this stuff. And we're going to hear from Anna Goldstein later, who is the lead on 32123. And she is, yes, she says lightly direct in the chat. It's like herding cats, right, Anna? But so that's the umbrella organization. Within Third Act, the umbrella, there are, as I mentioned, affinity groups like Third Act Faith, third act lawyers, third act educators, there's third act creatives getting started. Those groups all have national scopes and national ambitions. There are also, of course, local groups, Third Act Virginia, Third Act New York City, Third Act Ohio, and they have more of a, obviously, a geographic kind of focus. And while I'm thinking of this, I want to encourage everybody, get in touch with your local group if there is one, because those are the folks that are usually planning activities on the ground. They're probably planning something related to 32123, and you can get involved in that and actually, take part in that and make that your activity without leaving Third Act Faith. But that would be a good way to get involved with the on the ground stuff. Now, as far as what Third Act Faith has been doing in recent months, we are still kind of building the plane as we fly it, which I think is typical of this kind of organization, all of this volunteer stuff. We have some fairly significant and fairly productive already committees. I think probably foremost, the one that you've encountered the most actually is our communications committee, which is led by Jane Ellen Nickel. They put out the wonderful newsletter that goes out, the periodic supplements to that. Let's see, they run our Twitter account and our Facebook account. So they're sort of our primary outward facing and community facing contacts. And they're doing, I think, just a bang up job. They would love to have more people involved. So if you're interested in helping them out, please get in touch. You can always write to thirdactfaith@gmail.com. Or I think maybe folks will be putting their emails in the chat and you can write to them directly as well. In addition to communications, we have a committee that I believe is called Hope and Lament. And they're the folks that put out just a while ago, put out a series of reflections that I hope lots of you encountered and were able to use in your own spiritual life. They're going to be continuing to do that sort of thing, and they're looking to expand their scope as well and to expand their participation. That committee is led by Jamie Burns. If Jamie is here, maybe she'll put her email in the chat, or as I said, you can always write to thirdactfaith@gmail.com. And we have a spiritual resilience committee that Jerry Capel is it Jerry? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Jerry Capel wants to get started. If you're interested in talking with him about that, maybe Jerry will drop his email in the chat, or again, thirdactfaith@gmail.com. There are a number of other things kind of cooking still. We, I think, are in the process still of organizing a volunteer committee or membership committee, I guess, to really be in more constant and more prompt touch with people as they join. So that's something that's bubbling. And I think what's going to be the focus probably for the rest of our evening, there's Jerry's email in the chat. What's going to be the focus for the rest of our evening is our banking committee and what it's going to be doing in relationship to 32123. And I don't know, is this the time I toss to Dan for some explanation about that? So Dan Terpstra, who leads our faithful banking committee, you're up.
Okay, but you're still on my screen. There I am. As Pat pointed out, he described a little bit of the structure. We within Third Act Faith have formed a Third Act Faithful Banking Committee that's addressing the banking issues as Fletcher introduced so effectively to us. And we're beginning the process of trying to figure out what we're going to deliver in 8 weeks for 3-2-1-2-3 and how we're going to continue that momentum as we move forward. Boy, my face is really doing strange things. Do I need to turn my, yeah.
Just stop moving, Dan.
Just stop moving. I can't do that. That's impossible. How's that? I'm in
Yeah.
front of my green screen now. So third act faithful banking is a small number of us that are trying to coordinate things, but we also have about 200 members now for whom we have emails and faith affiliation information. And we are developing a series of liaisons to the larger of those groups. We've got about, I think we've got 10 groups identified that have on the order of a dozen different members identified, Presbyterians and Catholics and Buddhists and Unitarians and Lutherans and about 10 of those different groups. And then there's another group of about the same size that's the other group. And we've got liaisons for most of those organizations. Our hope is to set up the equivalent of a telephone tree, but rather than a telephone tree, it'll be an email tree where the liaisons reach out to those of you who've identified your faith tradition and try to get engagement, give you the tools that you need to engage with your faith communities. For example, I'm Presbyterian, I'm the liaison for the Presbyterians. I've got a dozen Presbyterian names. I'm going to reach out to those people and get them involved with their congregations to sign the pledge for stopping investing in the banks or putting our money in the dirty banks. Other groups can do the same thing. Also, if I know of something within the Presbyterian hierarchy that can effectively reach more congregations, I can leverage that. So for other faith traditions, if you have an understanding of your hierarchy and you get reached by the liaison for your denomination or faith tradition, that's one thing that you can begin doing almost immediately as we leverage this stuff. It's my understanding, and we're going to hear from Anna in a few minutes, that after 3-2-1-2-3, which is, she says we've got 8 weeks to do this, which sounds like forever, but 8 weeks within, again, I'll go back to my tradition as a Presbyterian. We do things decently and in good order, and that means slow. So 8 weeks is no time at all in many of our faith traditions. So about all we can probably do with our individual congregations is get people to sign up and maybe get people to identify a bank that they want to go sing hymns in front of, or maybe do a pray-in or something like that. We're listening for your ideas on a lot of these things, and we're hoping to build a network where we can all talk to each other and share ideas and make things move forward as quickly as we can. And then after 3-2-1-2-3, we're not out of business yet, because that's basically the opening salvo. So as we move forward, particularly as the faith community, that might be the opportunity to engage our congregations and our churches to begin the idea of moving their money out of these banks and actually applying more leverage to the dirty banks to see where we can go from there. So that's kind of the overview of what we've got structured, and we'll see where it goes. Pat, am I going back to you?
I think now it's going to Ace, who's going to introduce Anna.
Yes, indeed, I am. I was just taking notice of all the different religious faiths on the chat, and there's plenty of you to sign up at Third Act Faith, and let Dan know that you're interested. Put in your line, in your subject line, which committee you're interested in, and Dan's committee definitely needs you, especially right now, which brings me to the next part of our evening. I just have to open up my smartphone again and tell you all about Anna Goldstein. I'm very excited to have Anna join us tonight. She's from Third Act Central, as I just learned tonight to remind myself to say, and Anna is really spearheading this big day of action in March. Anna is the lead for the Stop Dirty Banks Day of Action and is also on the Third Act Advisory Council. She's worked for over a decade at 350.org. There she is. Hi, Anna. And also consults and coaches with other mainly climate NGOs. And it's always important to know her hobbies. When she's not on Zoom, you're probably on Zoom all day long these days. When you're not, she likes spicy food and books, dogs, and walking. So take it away, Anna, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ace. Thank you, everybody. I'm so honored and this call.
Uh-oh.
Yikes.
New. I can't.
Your internet is not working so well, Anna.
Let me try and get on another.
Well, the other thing you could do, although we of course would love to see you, maybe you could turn off your camera.
Let me turn off my video.
Yeah.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you fine.
Yes. we
Okay,
can.
I'm sorry about that. It appears as if I have plenty of Wi-Fi, but I want you to hear me more than see me. So I'm really honored and delighted to be with you all this evening, and I'm calling in from Ohlone Land, sometimes known as Berkeley, California, and I'm the lead on the Day of Action. So I'm all 3, 2, 1, 2, 3 all the time these days. And I see a lot of, I was starting to say that I see old friends and new on this call. There are people who I've been organizing with in climate spaces, I don't know, Pat, for a decade or something. And I friend last 6 months ago at a boot retreat at Tassajara. Steve is on the call, so I'm just really thrilled to be. And I have a few things that I'd like to tell you about, and I want to save some time for questions. So if you know quite as if what I just heard from Dan really beautifully articulates what we're doing and what we want to do. But I want to share a couple of things. So as Pat was talking about, there are geographic groups and there are affinity groups. And one of the things we're going to do, find many ways to connect those individuals and groups. So if you were on the last night, you saw that we unveiled for the first time our map, beautiful mobilized map that you can access easily on our website. And you can see where some third act groups have already put actions on the map. And some of you are members of geographic groups. You're already part of that. And so thank you. We're so grateful to the groups that got their actions up already. And there are more coming. But anyone can put an action on the map. And as I think Dan did a beautiful job of saying, all of us are part of community in so many different ways. And all of you are part of faith community, which is like a built-in organizing pod. And so as much as possible, we will encourage you as individuals, wherever you are, to plan an action. And an action could be one person with a sign. An action could be 5 people. Action could be a whole congregation at their congregation, or marching to a bank, or being in an impacted spot where you are geographically. So we're super excited about getting the affinity groups tapped into the geography, but also tapped into their affinity. And faith is a built-in congregation, right? You're good to go. So we're super lucky to have this organizing construct of your faith working group. I see people connecting in the chat and saying, I'm in Massachusetts, and making those connections within your group. But I would also say that we're going to be sending out an email. I think it's going to go on Monday, and it's going to go to all the affinity group members. So you will get this as part of your faith. You're signed up in the faith group. You will get this email, and it will be a list of one point person for each geography. So you can look on the list and say, oh, I live in Ohio. In Ohio, here's the email of the person I can contact that's planning geographically something for 32123. So that'll be one more way that you can connect. So you'll have, I venture to say, you'll have an embarrassment of riches. You'll have so many ways that you can either join or start an action. So I'm really excited about that for that. And then what Dan was saying, Dan basically said everything I was going to say. One thing I was going to say is that 32123 is an exclamation point in our campaigning. It's not the end of any story. People have been campaigning on climate finance for a decade. People have been campaigning in all sorts of ways around the climate crisis for decades. And so we are part of a long and beautiful and complicated and rich and diverse tradition and story. And we're going to add our own flavor and our own beautiful third act elements to it with music and song and with the wisdom of our elderness in everything we do. So there's going to be a lot to do after 32123, and part of that is going to be about institutional organizing. So that'll be about talking to your congregations and supporting them as they want to move their money and break up with dirty banks. And so parts of that can be, the seeds for that can be planted as you organize for 32123. You can start to, I hear you when you say that maybe 8 weeks isn't a long time, but seeds can be planted, and we never know what's happening with those seeds. You never know who you're talking to that's going to be able to water your brilliance in just the right way. So keep talking about it, keep spreading the word, keep reaching out to your communities. There's so many resources at Third Act. We've just put up this big new toolkit, and to what Dan was talking about, I can drop in the chat that the sort of like arc of what happens after. There's a link there in the chat, but that's all on the website and connected through the button that's right under the map. So Pat, did I say most of the things? I'm not exactly sure on my timing.
Yeah,
Do you want me to speak more on anything? Do you want me to take questions?
Actually, there's a question that I want to make sure we get. Margaret Bullitt Jonas wrote in the chat, just want to be sure, to be listed on the map, is it okay if Third Act members are simply joining an action that may include or be led by secular activists? Margaret, do you want to expand on your question a little?
Well, I just wasn't sure whether we were imagining that it's just a purely faith-led event or a faith participatory event, or are we, where I live in Northampton, there's a wonderful climate action group that is not, I'm sure it includes people of faith, but a lot of people are not faith members. I know they're very active in wanting to protest Chase Bank is coming into downtown Northampton. I know they're going to be organizing events. So I'm just thinking maybe I will just simply join their event and bring people of faith with me and clergy with me. Or to be listed on the map, does it need to be purely third faith people?
Oh, not at all, not at all, not at all.
Okay.
The map is open source. It's open to anyone. I love the idea of there being actions that have a framework of like, this is
I think
vigil. This is a hymn singing. No, faith. Our congregation.
Mhm.
What's that?
I think, Anna, we really got such a great idea from you, and we're ready and eager to break into our office here tonight. Do you hear us, Anna?
I do. I'm so
All right, let's turn to James for a minute. He has his hand patiently
sorry,
waiting.
but I do hear you.
Okay, that's great. Go
I
for
just
it.
wanted to quickly respond to Margaret's question. It turns out my wife and I are going to be traveling down in Durham, North Carolina. We're from Vermont, and I just registered using the map. I registered down in Durham. The organizer there immediately got back to me. He could see from my signature that I was a minister. He said, "Bring your clergy collar, and would you like to speak? Because people will listen to people of faith." So if that experience is made universal, as I expect it would, we're all in this together.
Great.
Still back to me. If you notice, I was facilitating this evening, and the energy in the room, even on the screen, is amazing. I don't think you need to pin me. I think it's great just to keep us all together and see all those faces and get the energy from one another. Thank you. That's so much better. And I wanted to just end the night with a couple of things. First off, to thank you all for coming, to thank you, Pat, for interviewing the Reverend Fletcher Harper, and for Jane Ellen and MJ and Dan, who really helped plan this evening and make it possible. You should have seen us all figuring out Zoom. It was pretty funny, but we did it. And truly, I love the ideas that came out of these rooms tonight. And it gives me hope when someone asks what gives Fletcher hope. So I just wanted to remind you, there was one thing I was supposed to remind you. Yes, stay tuned for the date of our next general meeting. Soon enough, you'll get an email from us. And in that email will be a poll to ask you how many times you want to meet, once a month, once every couple of months, and some of the topics you want to have happen in these meetings. We're really interested to hear from you to make this an ongoing and persistent gathering. As they said tonight, the work is not going to stop on 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, if only, right? And we wanted to end the evening with thanks and with peace and prayer. And one of the things I came up with is to think about this Hebrew song that's sung every Friday night around the Sabbath table for many Jews, including in my family, a song that maybe some of you have heard called Shalom Aleichem, which is a song of gathering, not only the people around the table, but also the people you greet and the angels that come in. Shalom Aleichem is peace to the angels, who are also, interestingly enough, called messengers in Hebrew. So we're not just angels, we're messengers. And certainly we have a message to give to the rest of the country. And we're going to be loud and persistent. Yes, we're going to persist. And the lyrics for this song starts with peace with you, ministering angels, messengers of the Most High. And then there are 3 stanzas. The second says, come in peace. The third says, bless us with peace. And the final one says, go in peace. And that is what we're going to do. So thank you all again for coming and for gathering. And Dan, bring us out in peace with this beautiful song.
Thank you, everyone.
Here we go.
Shalom Aleichem, Malchei HaSharei, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei HaMlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leShalom, Malchei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei HaMlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu leShalom, Malchei HaShalom.